big warm welcome. Coffee Buddies, welcome to you all. As you all know, because you're the regulars, we're a Coffee Buddies group who spend an hour together over a warm coffee or a glass of whatever you want to drink and engage, inform and entertain. And today, just to tell you, is a special day because we're launching the new Coffee Buddies network. We're going to invite you. It's a closed network group, which is going to be called Coffee Buddies Getting to Know You. And the idea is, as we were so successful last week in a getting to know you sort of format where we put people into rooms and we started building stronger interactions and networks. The question is how do you exchange business cards and keep connected? And we thought we would to be what is it, Graham, GPCR, or is that a type of protein?
Yeah, no. Yeah, we're GDPR compliant using the Mighty Network.
Compliant. We're going to use this format, so we would like you to join when we send you the email, and then invite others, and we can build this community that we so want to for the future. We think it will be very good for business, very good for pleasure, very good for everyone. So, but today
and just to mention, can I just add something to that? The networking afterwards, if anybody's free at 4, I know Benjamina's coming along, so Rob, I'll send you the details as well. We've got the networking, getting to know you at 4 o'clock. So I'll send out a few extra invites. Put your hand up if you want to go to that, and I'll send you the detail, like the virtual hand, that is, at some point of the event. So.
Fantastic. So, and it's a big welcome to Benjamina. Benjamina I met about, I suppose, a year ago or so outside the Jefferies conference when I asked Benjamina what she did. She said, well, I'm making meat and test tubes. And I thought, wow, that's exciting. So welcome to Benjamina, and maybe just introduce yourself and say who you are, Benjamina.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Higher Steaks. So we make meat using cell culture techniques. And how I got there, so I'm originally from Switzerland, grew up in Geneva, moved to London about 7 years ago now, where I studied chemical engineering at Imperial. And while I was doing that, had some experience in 3D printing and fragrance and flavoring, did some marketing work. With PepsiCo, was a lead software developer in a small startup. And essentially when I graduated, I didn't really know which direction I wanted to go. And I wanted to start something myself, but I was scared of starting kind of a big, ambitious project. So started a small company where essentially we were importing portable chargers that we would customize and sell to large hotel chains. So we were selling to Ritz, Intercontinental, Four Seasons. And around 7 months in, I realized, I actually miss science and engineering. And I really do want to do something that's big. And I remember going to this talk by Sam Altman, who is one of the partners at Y Combinator, where he said, if you do, essentially, no matter how ambitious the project, it's not harder to do something really, really ambitious than it is to do something less ambitious. And it doesn't matter how ambitious your idea is, it's not necessarily harder. And that kind of stuck with me and started really getting into my head. And essentially realized I wanted to do something really bigger and with a lot more impact. And while I was doing that, realized I wanted to do something really specifically around health. And I wanted to make sure that whatever I do would impact millions of people's health. So spend a long time.
This idea, Benjamina, I mean, I think you're maybe what they call Generation Z or something.
Oh, I'm a little bit before. Millennial, nearly.
But it's very interesting, you know, how you get the confidence and you've already mentioned one inspirational speaker, and we're always hearing that, you know, we're hearing that people are, I don't know, is there something that is in the air that triggers people of generation? Is there something different?
I mean, I think it is easier today to start. I mean, the cost essentially of starting are easier today. I think I also was, in a situation where my family could help me and supported me in starting this, which is a lucky situation that isn't, everyone my age can be in. But I think overall it is, there are in general more and more startup, and because we have seen in the software field, a lot of successes of people. It's not, because you're young that you can't do it. It is something that I think is starting more and more in biotech, and I think it is more difficult, and I think as a young entrepreneur we have to make sure that you surround yourself with the right people that can essentially fill in the gaps, and really get to know what you don't know, right, and know where the limits of your work is. But I think at the end of the day, I think people, are getting, my generation is getting a little bit more the courage to get into things when maybe they don't know everything, but admit essentially. And I think it also comes with the general wave of accepting failure more and saying, okay, well, I don't know everything, but I can get to the people that do know all these parts that I'm missing.
But is there something about security as well that the generation doesn't look for security? Because I come from a generation, and I think many of my colleagues do, where you had to sort of start securing yourself, get the old batten down the hatches a bit. Is this a different? Is it different, or is it just me?
I mean, I think it also depends. I know friends that, that, you'd ask them to do what I'm doing and they'd find it horrific. And the idea of, having a job that's not secure is, is crazy to them. But I think as an average, yes, we're buying less cars and houses and things like that. But I think there's also the element of realizing no job is secure. So, I've seen, people, parents of friends that, work 20, 30 years in Shell, and from a day to another, there's a problem and you get fired. And realizing actually even secure jobs are not necessarily secure. And I think that realization is also, I mean, and we're seeing it with COVID, right? You can work in large corporates and, we're as a tiny startup with no money are surviving, and there's companies worth a lot more that are having to fire most of their staff.
So your background's software, or is it biology?
Neither. Chemical engineering, which is a strange one, but essentially is taking processes and looking how can we scale them, which is
I mean chemical
of our industry.
Chemical engineer, from my experience, a lot of management consultants were chemical engineers. There's something about building blocks. You understand building blocks and waterfall diagrams. I suppose the question is, so you decided as a chemical engineer to look for, I suppose, a vat of something, and you decided a vat of stem cells was as good a place as any to make meat. Now, this to many of us sounds sort of outrageous, but tell us more. I mean, maybe you've got a couple of slides as well that can tell us about this sort of. I suppose to many of us who are dying to go back for an entrecote and frit. We're interested. What is this thing called artificial?
Sounds good. If oh, great! I'm co-host. And now share my screen. Here we go. So maybe I'll start with why would we even do that? And I think, I'm still a meat eater. So I really want us to succeed and have our product out, because I haven't managed to become a vegan. But meat is one of the biggest problems we're facing today. And that's because it puts a lot of, if you look at antibiotic resistance, for example, one of the biggest threats we have today, a lot of it is caused from the meat industry. And even with, with regulations, removing antibiotics from for growth purposes, you still have a ton that's used, and this is particularly the case with pork. You also have a matter of food security. So we've seen about a third of the pork population in China that's disappeared with African swine fever, which represents about a fourth of the whole pork supply globally. There's also an environmental problem, and well, yes, with cows it's the worst. It's still pretty bad with most meats, and that's from a land perspective, water perspective, greenhouse gas emissions, but also things such as nitrogen pollution. And because of that, there's been a rise in alternative proteins. So essentially, this mostly is plant-based at the moment. So people are talking also as insects as alternatives, but the real big kind of push is towards plant-based meat. The problem is that plant-based meat is not enough. The crops are still vulnerable to climate change. Often they're only able to make really, really processed products. And so you're getting sausages and burgers that are not necessarily healthy to eat every day. And they're not nutritionally equivalent. So they might be nutritionally equivalent to your sausage, but I haven't yet seen any plant-based meat that is actually nutritionally equivalent to a chicken breast or a lean meat. And most importantly, people prefer the taste of meat, and the more it's similar to meat, the better it is. And that's why plant-based companies such as Impossible Foods or Beyond Meat have had such a success, is because they're a lot more similar to meat than your piece of tofu is, which is why cultivated meat is such, is worth essentially all the effort, right? Because it would be way easier if we could all reduce our meat consumption by like 50%, right? Why bother going to take stem cells from animals and grow them and make a ton of inventions of how to make it cheaper if you could just, reduce meat consumption? The reality though is that people do like the taste of meat, and this is not going to happen fast enough for us to be able to make the changes that we need to make. So the way it works is that we take a non-invasive cell sample from the animal. In our case, we're working with a type of cell called induced pluripotent stem cells. So for those of you who don't know, essentially it's a way of taking any cell in the body and bringing it back to the embryonic state. So a technology that won the Nobel Prize back in 2012. And so once we have those cells, we expand them and we differentiate them into different types of tissues. So in our case, we're working mostly with muscle and fat. And depending on the product that you're doing, so you can either grow it already in the shape that you want, or if you're doing like a sausage, it won't grow in a sausage. So you'll grow the muscle and the fat, and then you'll mix it all together to make your sausage. So the downstream processing becomes quite similar to conventional meat. So this, please don't take a picture. So I know it's recorded, but maybe we might skip this out because we're not public with it yet. But this is the prototypes that we're working on. So it's a mixture between plant-based and cultivated meat.
So one really interesting question always is, why does it have to look like something else? So I mean, why does it have to look like a piece of bacon? I've gone into Sainsbury's and had a what is it, turkey beef burger, and I thought, my God, this is tautological nightmare. It's going around in a circle. It's not a turkey or it's a beef burger. And the same applies here, is that you're making it look like a piece of bacon. Surely it's irrelevant that it looks like a piece of bacon, and in particular to children, because when children will eat anything. So if if you just give them a tube for the next 20 years, they'll never know any different. So there's something really intriguing about the psychology of making it look like meat.
I mean, the thing is, the more it looks like meat, the more people will consume it. And you can have a niche market that will like it, you know, in a completely different shape. You can have a niche market, for example. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, talk about having lion meat and giraffe meat and rhinoceros meat and all these, you know, crazy things, because you can, right? You can take a blood sample from the animal and make, you know, lion meat as, you know, as much as we're making pork, right? But the reality is then you're really creating a niche and you're less focused on the problem. And that's one of the issues, for example, that I had with the people working on making foie gras, in cultivated foie gras in San Francisco, where it's banned. I said it's a lovely PR stunt, but you know, you're not actually solving a problem. The problem that we're trying to solve is to replace meat, and the more similar it is to what it's replacing, the better it is. Now, once people get used to it, you can start having more niches. And I think what you're saying is interesting from, you know, the young generation. But again, you know, who's buying that food for, you know, for those kids? At the moment, it's adults that have been raised with, you know, meat that looks this way. And so in 20, you know, 30 and more, 100 years, maybe it will look completely different. But I think for now, and it's interesting, there's an artist, I can find maybe in the networking phase, there's an artist that made like, that pretended, essentially made it look like, you know, meat, but it was like in the form of a shell. And it looks really strange, but it's quite interesting. And I remember the first reaction when our head of R&D sent it to me was, this does not look good. So
but there is
when
something,
it looks like meat, it's something appetizing that we're used to it, right?
it is really interesting, because food comes with stories. You know, often a chef will come out and say, this is a beautiful piece of foie gras or something, you know, from the best ducks in the world or something. And actually, before you've eaten it, my mother was very good at that. She would sell me what she was going to make for me just by the story behind it. I've been to the shop and got you a beautiful piece of bacon and everything. So the question for artificial meat is, what story will be behind it? And
So
it can't be a lab. It just can't be, because it won't be palatable.
Yeah, I mean, you still have the story of the animal, and if anything, you can actually have, you can be eating the animal with the animal next to you, right? So you still have the animal, and you can say, you know, I mean, we're right now, the cells that we're working on are, you know, research and basic, you know, animals, but on the commercial level, we can go and really select the exact animal that we want, and have a whole story around that animal itself. And they've actually shown, so Rosalind Institute shown that when you look at like small pigs, they're a lot more likely to differentiate into fat, when larger pigs more likely to differentiate into muscle. So there are elements, you know, to it that actually help us depend on what we're looking to make. But there's also the story of where are our cells from, what are the ingredients that we're using. And again, right now everything is not very exciting from the ingredients perspective, but some ingredients we can have a story behind it. And then how, you know, how we make it, how we, you know, all the flavoring that will, you know, that we can add to it, the way we process the meat further on, all these things are things that we can still play the story on. But I think most importantly is which, you know, where are our cells from, and what does the end product look like? So how much, you know, how much fat content, what type of fat, what are the extra nutrients that we're adding, and so on, that we can still, we can still work around.
Fantastic.
We can still and we can also, you know, I think, again, it's a different story, right? You have all the Wagyu beef and the massaging, you know, of these cows and all of that. we can still make, we will need to stimulate the muscle, and work, through electric and mechanical stimulation. So how we do that, again, it might be robots rather than massaging, all of that. But again, there can still be a story behind it. It just will be a different story.
Yeah, very interesting, especially in the COVID time, when often the most exciting thing in the day was what we're going to eat. It's like, what do we got? What do we got for tea? It's so very interesting. But we'll carry on, Benjamin.
Sure. And just to end on also why we're doing it is really because we can significantly reduce the land usage, water usage, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, no antibiotics, and we can do all this without killing any animal. So, which is why it also makes it easier if it's, endangered animals and so on. But the reason we're not all eating this is because there's still some challenges. So as you all probably know, biotech is horrifically expensive. And because it's coming from the biotech field, at the moment, the costs are really, really expensive. But there's no reason it should stay this way. And essentially, when you look at the elements one by one, a lot of them, if you actually made them at large scale, the cost can be brought down. And the other part is the scalability. So it's one thing to grow, 50 grams, 100 grams, even 1 kilogram in small bioreactors, is another to have a really, consistent manufacturing system that allows us to make billions of kilograms of meat. And that's when we're really starting to have an impact. And so there's still some challenges around making the cells replicable and the differentiation replicable enough so that it can really scale.
And this thing about differentiation factors, I mean, some of them are, to make cells grow, sometimes you need bovine serum albumin. You need things in there. Yeah. Question is what, is a regulator interested in this? Is this a regulatory question?
So it's definitely a regulatory question, and also a consumer acceptance question. So there might be something that the regulators accept, and also but the end consumer doesn't. In terms of fetal bovine serum, I think most companies have already managed, including ourselves, have managed to remove it. Anyone working with induced pluripotent stem cell, it's fairly easy to get rid of fetal bovine serum. We don't use any differentiation factors. We use one growth factor, but there are a lot of elements that that are a lot more difficult, and some companies are using immortalized cell lines, which again, from a regulatory perspective, is debatable. From the what is actually from a genetic engineering perspective, so some companies are debating, well, if the end product looks like the natural product, it's not genetically engineered, whereas really our perspective is the process. If you use genetic engineering in the process, then it is genetic engineering. That's not a bad thing, but it's something
I mean, this is an interesting thing about immortalized cells, like HeLa cells, that are universally talked about, but also people are starting to say, well, are they HeLa cells anymore? And is everybody's HeLa cell the same? So it's an interesting journey to go on. And the bioprocess, is it one day they're going to be big tubs full of artificial meat? My goodness.
Pretty much. Yeah. So there'll be massive bioreactors, and I think there's a lot of innovation there as well, because bioreactors have not been constructed to make meat, to grow cells at such a, cells that you keep at such a scale. And often when we talk to people in bioreactors, or, they're like, oh, we can make a ton of cells, I don't know, they'll talk about 10 million or something. We're like, that's not even a kilogram. So really, there's a lot of innovation there. And that's, I think with the technical challenges, that's the exciting part of the journey, is that all these challenges are room for innovation, both from us, but also from other companies. So yeah, as Rob can maybe tell you later, later in the networking, I think there will be a lot of collaboration in this.
Interesting. Thank you. Next slide.
Sorry, I didn't
Have you
hear.
got any more slides?
Yes. So there's the non-technical challenges. So as you mentioned, regulations. So in Europe, we go through the novel food regulation unless it's considered as genetically engineered or genetic modification, and then we go through the GMO route. In the US, it's both USDA and FDA that jointly regulate it. So FDA does the upstream, USDA the downstream. So things like labeling and so on, whereas FDA will look at where a cell line's coming from, unless it's fish, and then it's purely FDA. But they haven't exactly mentioned how. So in Europe, we know it takes about 1.5 years. We know it will cost around $1 million to prepare our dossier for the novel food regulation, but in the US, it's still, very, very early. In Singapore, they're talking about a quite fast go-to-market, so they're talking about 6 months of regulations, but it's still debated whether they will approve anything before Europe or the US approves. China, it's the novel food, so they have their own novel food system, and Australia similarly is also novel foods, and other countries are still debating. And then
and capital appetite, Benjamina.
Yeah, so I think I put capital there because really when you look at like software companies, and I think capital is in the same way as biotech, right? It's a capital intensive business. And to really scale this, it will require a lot of capital, either from us or through, partnerships, but it's not something that you can scale with, a few with a few computers. And consumer acceptance, so at the moment it's pretty high and there's some really promising results, but again, it's keeping it this way and getting to mass market where we really have the impact is going to be a challenge.
I mean, I suppose on the cap front, it feels like it sits close to this longevity sort of area, which which is all about, I don't know, living till 101 by eating the right things. Does that, as you look for capital, are investors saying, wow, this is intriguing?
Yeah, so from an investor perspective, I think the difficult part is that it's very early and no one's yet commercialized it. So it feels very like a moonshot, but at the same time, there's a lot of people in the space. But it is definitely something people are getting excited about. I think pure biotech investors are sometimes finding it difficult to see the value in it because, if you can make muscle at such, large quantities, why would you sell it for $10 a kilogram? But I think people are getting more and more into it, and you are seeing a few biotech investors coming into the field.
Fantastic. I think we're heading towards questions, but any other slides? You've got no more slides.
No, I think that's it.
I mean, Benjamin, just one last, so can you just putting your crystal ball on for the next 100 years when I'm close to 200? Well, not really. What will it be like? Will I be eating my Mars bar will be differentiated cells? Will I be, what's it going to be like eating wise?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is I really think it will reach mass market, and by that I think 60% or so of the population will be eating this. So I do think it will be the dominant way of people getting protein. I don't know. I would think that we've been eating meat for so long, it's actually going to look pretty much the same. It will just be better. And I know it's not the answer you want from me, but I think from a global perspective, there will be a lot of similarities. But 100 years from now, I do think that cultivated meat will be able to be cheaper than conventional meat and allow access essentially to a lot of other people. And I think what will be different is that it will be a lot more personalized. So by then, I hope that we'll be able to. So right now, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to grow the cells, and then the shortest really to have fully mature muscle is around 7 days. So you're looking at 3 to 4 weeks for the whole process. Really, if you want to shorten it, you're looking maybe at 2 weeks. But if you're able, by then, with using genetic engineering, hopeful will catch up, able to shorten those time frame, then you'll be able to have more personalized meat. So you can really go to the supermarket and think, oh, well, I want 10% fat from this animal with that animal, and really get the meat exactly like you want. But I think that's, the kind of printer doing exactly the meat that you want is not 10 years away. It's a little bit further.
Well, Benjamina, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. Maybe we can move to questions. And Graham, Mr. Curator, maybe you can lead us on the questions.
I believe Andrew Moore has a question for you. Andrew, if you could take yourself off mute, that would be great.
Oh, you want me to read it out? I thought I just had to type it.
You just... No, we want you involved,
Oh, excellent. Okay, rightio. That's perfect. So Benjamina, I mean, looking at Asia, and I've spent the majority. The interesting thing, I've spent the majority of my adult life living in Asia. Everything's around freshness, and one of the first things we learned when we went to Asia is we had people that took us around and taught us about how to find the best fish, et cetera, and they really purchase on freshness. How's a cell cultured meat going to be able to sort of convince? And you want 60%, if you're saying 60% acceptance, that means you're going to have to get China, you're going to have to get India, Indonesia, Bangladesh. I mean, there are large population countries to buy into that this is fresh.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because and I was actually asked it, I think about 2 years ago, and at the time I hadn't thought about it at all. And this idea that a lot of the time as well, for those of you who don't know, the way you see freshness is actually by having the live animal, and that's the difficult part, right? If you have to have the live animal and you see the fish before you actually cook it, that's not something we can necessarily replicate. But there are ways where you could have a traceability system where really exactly where your meat went, and being able essentially to follow it. It is a difficult question, which I've been thinking about, but I don't have the perfect answer. But I think as well with freshness is why you have to go back to why people want it fresh, right? And it's really from a safety perspective. So if we can prove that our products are safe and that they were made in clean environments, and there's no reason to be worried about it, then I think it could replace some of that element of freshness. And as well, in general, our meat should be able to have a longer shelf life. So again, stay fresh longer. But the kind of ingrained culture of seeing the animal live or full, that's going to be a tough one to get around. I know.
Will you have to refrigerate it?
You will, yes. You still have to refrigerate it.
That's a big thing, isn't it, in China, that there's not enough fridge. So that's what our friend Michael said from Moderna, that meat at the point of buying because they don't get the cold chain that sort of takes them there. But interesting.
You still have to
Sorry.
refrigerate it.
Yeah.
It can stay longer in the fridge, but you still have to refrigerate.
Yeah, Graham.
And Andrew, did you have a follow-on question about the GMP environment and what have you?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the comments that you made about the you know, the cost of growth factors and everything, and especially when they're when they are GMP quality, they are very expensive. But non-GMP, they're not expensive. So, are you operating in a GMP environment, a CGMP environment? I mean, obviously, you'll have standards, of course, maybe ISO or things like that. But are you operating in a GMP environment?
Well, at the moment we're operating in the lab, but the regulators haven't yet told us whether we do need to be GMP or not. But essentially, there's no reason we should be. And if we are at food standards, it should be enough. And that's what, from early conversations with that's what we've been told. And essentially doing everything under a closed system so that it's controlled will allow us to avoid having to have clean rooms. And as you said, that is a major cost factor that we should be able to go around.
Interesting.
Okay. I'm wondering about the taste of these things. I mean, how do you get these things to taste? But I mean, what is it that you're doing that alters the taste and what have you?
Yeah. So the taste, I mean, it is actual muscle and actual fat. So the components of what is taste, a lot of it is actually with pork, a lot of it comes from so culturing the fat already gives a lot of the taste. Now, to really have it perfected, there might be a point that we add some flavoring until we really perfect our processes. But we are able to have, from a theoretical perspective, we can have exactly the same. Now, in reality, we will have some manipulation in the beginning just to really mimic it, particularly when it comes to getting out of the sausage or meatball. And when you're working as well with, for example, beef, so if you want to mimic the taste of blood and you don't actually want to culture blood, then again, you're going to have to work around it. But the meat itself does have, taste. It's just essentially everything tastes a bit like chicken unless you add the fat to it. And when you add the fat to it, that's when you're really getting the difference between, chicken and pork and beef and so on. But
Right.
as well, so I haven't, so when you talk about like shellfish, but I know people that have, for example, tasted shrimp and they say it really has that like sea taste, particularly when they grow it on alginate. So it really tastes like, really tastes fishy. So you do have those differences in taste.
So maybe you'll do like they do with perfumes. They'll have a perfumer who has notes, flavor notes that a master flavor, something for the future. Graham, next question.
Well, carry on, Benjamina, carry on.
Oh, just quickly. So around flavoring, I mean, I know on the plant-based side, a lot of the big flavoring companies, they're actually working on not just mimicking the taste of meat, but actually having it so subtle that it tastes like, a beef from the US versus a beef from Australia versus, all the different kinds of beef. So they're already working on that for the plant-based sector, and it will be only easier to do it with us. But I think it's, again, the cells themselves might be similar, but what makes the difference between a beef that's cultured in the UK versus a US is, how the end product looks and how smooth the muscle is, how much you exercise the muscle, what's the fat content, how the fat is marbled, and all those elements that we are able to control.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. I don't know if you've answered it already, but Nick Stevens, how are you doing? Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm just wondering if you have any follow-up from what you were writing. If you take yourself off mute. Take yourself off mute. Oh, there you go. There you are.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Benjamina, great to meet you, and good to see some familiar faces out there. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I had some experiences in this because I've been involved quite deep in the Singapore ecosystem for the last 16 years, and they've run through and invested in a number of startups like Benjamina's. So we'll take that offline, maybe Benjamina, and if there's anything I can do to support, I will. I think the core is actually about the taste experience and about what you're paying for. And, you know, with the first $100,000 burger, people were paying to be novel rather than to eat something that tasted good. And where we will see this, I think, and I'd like to know Benjamina's opinion, do you think this will be bulk food manufacture a la corn early on and going in to replace things like Spam or fish balls or whatever? Or do you see an opportunity for the sort of higher margin, more experiential application?
I think it will be different because I think the advantage that we have is that we're able to really get high quality and on the long term reduce the cost of that. So essentially on the, you know, not 100 years from now, actually, you know, probably 50 years from now, I can see you being able to get a Wagyu beef quality for the price of a regular steak. And I think we do have, and I think that's how we will differentiate from the plant-based market, is really having quality. So I don't think we'll stay very long in sausages and mince and things like that. But it will still be a mass market thing. So the reason a lot of people aren't purchasing, you know, the higher quality is because of the price. And I think it will reach mass market, but I think it will reach mass market with quality products rather than, you know, the lower end sausages, which I think, you know, plant-based do a really good job at replicating. And I think that's where we can differentiate, is with the more complex meats. And meat itself, I think, will become a niche. So it will become your steak that was actually an animal that's been raised and killed. I think over time that will become the niche.
Great.
But no Spam fritters. We don't want Spam fritters.
And then do you see,
on any account?
sorry, a little follow on to that. I guess there's also this, you know, if you talk about the coming demise of the petrol car, many people see it as a good thing for more than one reason. And, you know, the analog was horses, which were beasts of burden that lived in the worst possible conditions. And I think that's very true, for example, of American beef farming, who now are prized pets and, you know, racehorses. So you only have the very top end.
Yeah.
So that's the way. Do you predict that arc, or is this a complete replacement for? Exactly.
So I think, you know, there are animals out there, you know, there is meat out there that is, you know, environmentally friendlier. There's, you know, well-raised animals that, you know, live a full life and so on. But that's not your mass market. That's not your factory farming. And I think right now the factory farming is the majority, and that's putting both animals and people in danger. And I mean, with COVID, we've seen the consequences, and actually endangering people's lives so that we can have meat. And there's no reason that we need to do that. And the majority of meat that people eat on a daily basis, and sometimes 3 times daily basis, is not, you know, the meat that's the highest quality for the majority part of the world. I think that's the one that's going to be replaced, and I think it will allow as well for farmers to have less pressure. Now I think some farmers as well will move to different areas, so as well as the plant-based meat sector increases, there will be more need for again different essentially different kind of farming. There will be different. It is a challenge. It is something, you know, that we need to think about, but also it's not a change that will come overnight. It's not like one day will happen and all farmers will be out of a job. It's something that's gradual and will allow as well time to adapt and to have the solutions to make sure that we don't have, you know, suddenly massive unemployment or any problem like that, which would end up having other problems.
Interestingly, we've got two investors there, Rebecca and Joel. I mean, what's your view on this sort of world?
Well, it's hard for me to comment because I've already met Benjamina, and she's presented, and she kind of quite nicely summed up my feedback, in fact, earlier when you asked her what the view of investors was. So
yeah,
I'm not going to add very much probably to that. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Which funds will have an appetite for it is the question, probably, you know, and that's going to be how much money does it take to get there. Have you got both the technological challenge, like you do, equivalent to a biotech, plus the commercial challenge, equivalent more to a consumer product? So you have to have the appetite for doing both. So you've got to have the right sort of fund with the right investment strategy to have the appetite for that, would be my comment.
Yeah. And Joel,
find a vegetarian investor. That's what I think.
Is Joel anywhere behind his picture, or is this a phantom Joel?
No, it's me. Hi.
Hi, lovely to see you, or not see you, Joel.
And, that's certainly interesting, but it remains to be seen how it can compete with first conventional meat, and then the meat substitutes that are numerous, plant-based meat substitutes. And because it's a technology infancy, there's many issues that we've discussed, which are technological, regulatory. So it may be investing too early. Yeah? And so I think I would be still prudent having a look. Certainly the large food companies are all over it, yeah? Which is another problem for the startups. So it will certainly happen, but if it's in 10 years, it's too early for investors to step in.
Interesting. Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, Peter's got a question. I know Peter's been itching to ask, has been thinking very heavily. If you take yourself off mute, you can go in there, Peter. You got to take yourself. There you go.
Got it.
Perfect.
I was actually prompted by Joel there. I was thinking, understand manufacturing meat, but the market, there's a big market that says the difference between a brisket, a Chateaubriand, and an oxtail is completely different. Are you going that far? I'm not being frivolous here, I'm being serious.
So you mean in making the difference between each type of meat and where it comes from?
Yes, because haute cuisine, you would know the difference, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But really, it's again examining how that meat is made and what makes them different. And a lot of it comes in how it's structured, what is the fat content, what type of fat, how exactly how much the muscle is exercised, all these different elements that we are able to control. I think this is something that's a little bit further. I don't think the first products will be able to really have the difference. But I think on the long term, this is definitely something we'll be able to do. And we'll be able to work as well with the flavoring to create those subtleties. But I think as initial products, we'll be able to have complex products, but it will still be, again, like bacon, and it will, again, like it will be bacon, but really whether we can have loads of different types of bacon, not necessarily, but I think on the long term, as it's easier to scale and as companies gain scale, it will be easier to do that. And from a technical perspective, it's feasible.
Right.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
We've got just one more from Nick, actually, just to follow on from Nick, and then we can round up, I think. That'd be good. Nick?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the extent to which you are applying sort of closed loop thinking. A number of other industries which on the face of them have been environmentally beneficial, and I'm thinking things like soy oil, biodiesel, those kinds of industries which quickly became much more damaging to the environment because it either displaced food production for local people or they cut down virgin forests to grow those things on. So how do you plan to prevent those kinds of unintended consequences?
Yeah, and this is a really good question, and it's making sure, I mean, from early on to really work on life cycle assessments, making sure we know what are the ingredients we use, where do they come from, how are they produced, what are the, you know, environmental impacts of everything. And these are all things that we can model. And if we ask those questions, if we are aware that this could be a problem, modeling it before we actually get to scale is the most important, and being able essentially to predict. And I think to add on a more positive note, what we are able as well, the exciting thing is because we're recreating things from scratch, it is easier to look at, you know, okay, well, we need energy, great. Can we put our, manufacturing plants in places where it's easier to get renewable energies? How can we, you know, place everything that we have differently? So they've shown, for example, they've done a life cycle assessment on cultivated meat in different countries. And obviously, you know, in warmer countries, because the bioreactors need to be heated to 37 degrees, again, easier. So all these subtleties, if you know to look for them before you're actually at large scale, are things that we can address and things that we can prevent. I can't say that it's all solved and that now at the stage where we are, we're 100% sure there's absolutely no consequence, but we're definitely aware and looking out for those things. And as our processes become more and more defined, we are able to have better, you know, better measurements of those life cycle assessments.
I think we need to start closing down. Can I just give a big round of applause to Benjamina? That was awesome. I think we'll all go away and have to think heavily about this. And in the spirit of Coffee Buddies, if you need help, please contact the community. That's what we're all about. A couple of things. Firstly, we have our Getting to Know You session. When is it, Graham?
It's at 4 o'clock, so just in half an hour. I don't know if Nick, you'd like to go to that, or anybody else if they want to put their hands up.
So this is where we put people into rooms and effectively we create networking. Secondly, we're launching our platform, which please, if you get an email, can you join? It's got our content in, it's got our white papers, it's got our short posts written by Susanna Elridge, so you can do that. And Graham, what do we got to look forward to next?
Yeah, well, on Thursday we have Tim Dyer, the CEO of Addex Therapeutics, joining us, so that should be a great show. He's had an experience where, you know, COVID was hitting, and he had to postpone his phase 3 trial for Parkinson's, and he actually caught it himself. But he's really going to be talking about how he's had to kind of rejig everything, and you know, kind of having once had all the money to get his phase 3 trial, suddenly finding that actually he hasn't got enough money now to do that. So how he's planning to put that together. So yeah, Tim Dyer should be very interesting.
Fantastic. So folks, thanks for coming. Be careful out there, and bye for now.